It was supposed to be just another uneventful afternoon. The kind of day where nothing big happens, where the sun hangs low in a clear, cloudless sky, and people go about their routines without giving much thought to anything or anyone else. The quiet hum of the day seemed peaceful on the surface, like water rippling gently across a still pond. But sometimes, even the calmest water can hide something deep, something unexpected. Alex Carter didn't stand out. To most people, he was just another face in the crowd, forgettable, ordinary, invisible. That's how he liked it. He preferred it that way. A man who went unnoticed could live without drawing attention, without inviting trouble. Trouble, after all, had followed him for too many years. The parking lot outside Rico's Pizza was nearly empty, except for Alex's beat-up white delivery van parked in the corner. The van had seen better days, its paint chipped, its engine rattling with every drive. On its side, the faded logo of a pizza slice barely stood out anymore. Alex didn't care. As long as it ran, that's all that mattered. Alex stood at the counter inside the small pizzeria, balancing 3 greasy pizza boxes stacked high in one hand. They were heavier than they looked, but he handled them with the ease of someone who knew what he was doing. He gave the cashier a polite nod, his quiet, low-key way of saying thanks, and headed out the door. The bell above the door jingled weakly as Alex stepped outside, his worn boots crunching against the gravel underfoot. The air was hot, thick with the smell of car exhaust and baked asphalt. He could feel sweat gathering under his collar, but he didn't mind. Alex was used to far worse. He'd faced heat that could break men, winds that could tear skin, and long nights that stretched endlessly across barren deserts. But no one here knew that. To them, Alex was a delivery driver, nothing more. He walked with a steady rhythm, pizza boxes balanced perfectly as he made his way toward the van. His steps were even, unhurried. Everything about him looked ordinary. Brown cargo pants, a faded red t-shirt, and an old baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. Even his posture, shoulders relaxed, head down, seemed to say, nothing to see here. But if anyone had looked closer, they might have noticed something odd. The way his eyes moved, scanning the lot as he walked. Calm but alert. The kind of look a man develops only after years of learning to pay attention to his surroundings. Those deep, watchful eyes took in every detail, the way the leaves trembled in the soft breeze, the buzz of a distant radio, the 3 motorcycles parked on the far side of the lot. The bikes were custom choppers, big, loud, and polished to a shine. Chrome and leather reflected the harsh afternoon sun, making them look almost menacing even when they were sitting still. Near them, a group of men lounged against the low wall at the edge of the lot. They weren't locals, Alex could tell that much right away. They looked too rough, too out of place in a sleepy town like this. The leader of the group, easily recognizable by the thick skull tattoo stretched across his neck, leaned back on his bike, arms crossed, a cigarette dangling lazily from his lips. He was tall, muscular, with the kind of face that seemed to have seen its fair share of fights. His friends weren't much better, big guys with scruffy beards, dirty boots, and leather jackets that told their own stories. They were bikers, plain and simple. The kind of men who rode into town, made noise, and left people shaken. Alex didn't give them more than a passing glance. He wasn't looking for trouble. Not today. But trouble has a way of finding people who aren't looking for it. The bikers watched as Alex walked across the lot. Their conversation had quieted now, their eyes following his every move like a pack of wolves spotting prey. Alex felt their stares, heavy and expectant, but he didn't look up. He didn't break his pace. He simply kept walking, the pizza steady in his grip. "Hey," a voice called suddenly, sharp and cutting through the quiet lot. Alex ignored it. "Hey, pizza boy," the voice called again, louder this time, harsher. Alex slowed just slightly, pausing for half a second before continuing toward his van. He didn't turn his head, didn't acknowledge the voice at all. But that small pause was enough for the group to take it as a challenge. "Ah, what's the matter? Too good to talk to us," the voice jeered. The laughter that followed was loud and cruel, echoing across the empty lot. Alex reached the side of his van and carefully placed the pizza boxes on the passenger seat. His movements were slow and deliberate, but inside his head, his mind was working fast. He could still feel their eyes on him, their taunts hanging in the hot afternoon air like thick smoke. "Don't engage," he thought to himself. "Let it go." The leader, the man with the skull tattoo, stood up from his bike, tossing his cigarette to the ground and stomping it out with his boot. His friends followed suit, chuckling and shoving each other like this was all a game. Alex sighed quietly. He'd seen men like this before. Different faces, different clothes, same attitude. Bullies. They loved picking on people who looked weak, people who wouldn't fight back. And that's exactly how Alex looked to them, a skinny delivery driver with a beat-up van and an old cap hiding his face. "Ain't nobody." "Yo, pizza guy." Skullneck barked as he strolled across the lot, his boots thudding heavily against the ground. His friends followed closely behind, their laughter growing louder. "You got a problem with us?" Alex turned his head slowly, finally meeting the man's eyes. For the briefest moment, there was silence, a beat of stillness where time seemed to freeze. And then, Alex spoke. His voice was quiet, calm, but firm. "No problem." It wasn't the response Skullneck wanted. "No problem," he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He turned to his friends, smirking. "You hear that? Guy says he's got no problem. What do you think, boys? Sounds like he doesn't respect us." The group chuckled darkly. Alex said nothing. He didn't move. Skullneck took another step closer. The sun caught the edge of the chain hanging from his belt, glinting dangerously. "You know," Skullneck said, his tone mocking, "guys like you shouldn't ignore guys like us. That's how accidents happen." One of the bikers snickered. Another cracked his knuckles loudly, the sound sharp and deliberate. Alex's gaze stayed steady, locked onto the leader. There was no fear in his eyes, only calm, quiet patience. The kind of patience that unsettles men who are used to seeing fear. For a moment, Skullneck hesitated. Something about Alex's stillness made him uneasy. It was subtle, so subtle that his friends didn't notice. But Alex noticed. He noticed everything. Skullneck cracked a grin, though it didn't reach his eyes. He was close enough now that Alex could smell the cigarette smoke on his jacket, the faint tang of motor oil lingering on his leather gloves. The man wanted a reaction, any reaction. But Alex didn't give him one. "You look pretty quiet, pizza boy," Skullneck said, his voice low and gravelly. "Too scared to speak, huh? You one of those guys who's just gonna stand there and take it?" The bikers behind him snickered again, their laughter sharp and cutting, but Alex didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that words couldn't hurt a man if he didn't let them in. His years had taught him the value of silence, of patience, of waiting. But Skullneck wasn't done. He took another step, the soles of his heavy boots scraping against the gravel. Now he was close enough to touch the van, his fingers curling around the edge of the driver's side mirror. Alex's reflection stared back at him, calm and steady, unreadable. "You think you're better than us?" Skullneck sneered, leaning in. "Huh? That it?" The words didn't bother Alex. The man's tone didn't bother him either. It was the touch, the way Skullneck gripped the mirror like it belonged to him, that finally made something shift in Alex's chest. Still, Alex stayed quiet. His hands rested at his sides, steady as stone. The sun beat down hard, heat shimmering off the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out a short, sharp cry that cut through the heavy air. The silence stretched on too long. Skullneck's grin faltered, just slightly, and Alex caught it. He could tell that the biker was growing uneasy. Men like him, loud, cocky, used to getting their way, they didn't like being ignored. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Skullneck snapped, slapping the side mirror with the back of his hand. The motion sent a small tremor through the van, the mirror rocking on its hinge. Alex slowly turned his head, his gaze finally meeting Skullneck's again. For the first time, Alex spoke, his voice even and quiet but carrying more weight than the bikers expected. "I don't want trouble." The words were simple, but there was something in the way Alex said them that gave Skullneck pause. The biker's grin returned, but it was forced now, like a mask he was trying to keep on. "Don't want trouble?" Skullneck mocked, turning to his friends with a laugh. "Hear that, boys? He doesn't want trouble. Well, lucky for him, we do." The others laughed too, louder this time. One of the bikers, a shorter man with a long red beard, stepped forward, grinning like a child who'd found a new toy. He pulled a chain from his pocket and let it swing loosely in his hand. "Come on, Skull," the red-bearded biker said. "Let's teach Pizza Boy a little respect. Maybe we'll take that van of his for a ride." Skullneck's grin widened. "You hear that, Pizza Boy? My friend here's got a great idea. You know, we could use a new ride. Yours looks just about perfect for us." Alex's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but his expression didn't change. He knew what they were trying to do, push him, bait him into a reaction. He could see it in their eyes, the way they fed off each other's energy. It reminded him of a pack of hyenas circling a lion, too stupid to realize the danger they were in. "Why don't you just leave?" Alex said, his tone flat and steady. For a moment, Skullneck stared at him, surprised by the quiet strength in Alex's voice. The biker didn't say anything. Then, his grin twisted into something darker. "Oh, we're not going anywhere," Skullneck said softly, his voice dropping an octave. "Not until you show us some manners. Maybe say please." The group laughed again, the sound grating and mean, but Alex didn't move. He stayed perfectly still, his eyes locked onto Skullneck. It was as if the laughter didn't touch him, as if he were standing on a different plane altogether. And that's when Skullneck's smirk faltered again. Just for a second. There was something about this guy, this quiet, unshakable delivery driver, that didn't feel right. Skullneck couldn't explain it. He told himself it was just the heat, the silence of the empty lot, the way this man didn't flinch. But deep down, somewhere in the pit of his stomach, he felt it, an instinctive pull, like a warning bell ringing far off in the distance. The others didn't feel it, though. They were still grinning, still moving closer. "Come on, let's see what he's got in the van," Redbeard said, stepping around to the passenger side. His chain clinked as it swung, the sound cutting through the thick air. Alex turned his head slightly, watching Redbeard without moving his body. His heart was steady, his breathing calm. Years of training had taught him how to slow it down, how to focus. Redbeard grabbed the passenger door handle and gave it a tug. The door didn't budge, locked. That didn't stop him, though. He grinned, pulling the chain taut in his hand and slapping it against the window. The sound was sharp metal meeting glass. Alex didn't move. "Not yet." "Hey," Skullneck called out. "Maybe we'll leave him something to remember us by." He turned back to Alex and, with a casual swing of his arm, smacked the side mirror again, this time hard enough to make it bend backward with a loud snap. The sound echoed across the lot like a gunshot. For a long moment, everything was silent. The laughter stopped. The bikers watched, grinning, waiting for Alex to snap, waiting for the pizza boy to react. But Alex didn't snap. He didn't yell, didn't curse. Instead, he did something that caught them all off guard. He sighed. A quiet, tired sigh that said more than words ever could. And then, slowly, Alex turned his head to face Skullneck again. His eyes had changed, now no longer quiet and patient. There was something behind them, something sharp and cold. "You shouldn't have done that," Alex said softly. The smile vanished from Skullneck's face. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice suddenly unsure. Alex didn't answer. Instead, he reached up and pulled the old baseball cap off his head, revealing a short-cropped military-style haircut. He ran a hand through his hair, as if shaking off the last bit of restraint. For the first time, Skullneck noticed the scars on Alex's knuckles, small, faded marks that told stories no one here could possibly understand. Redbeard didn't notice, though. He was too busy pulling back his arm to swing the chain again. "Hey!" Skullneck barked at him suddenly, but it was too late. The chain swung forward with a hiss, aiming for the glass. And then Alex moved. It happened so fast that none of them saw it coming. One moment, Alex was standing still. The next, he had stepped forward, his hand snapping out to grab the chain mid-swing. There was a sharp crack as the chain went taut in Alex's grip. Redbeard froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. Alex stared at him, his expression calm, too calm. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he yanked the chain clean out of Redbeard's hand. It clattered to the ground, a lifeless coil of metal. Redbeard stumbled back, his face pale. Skullneck's jaw tightened. "What the hell?" Alex dropped the chain at his feet, the sound of it hitting the ground like a judge's gavel. "You don't want to do this," Alex said quietly, his voice carrying across the lot. The bikers stared at him, no longer laughing. They had no idea what kind of man they were dealing with. The parking lot was an empty stretch of cracked asphalt, quiet except for the rumble of motorcycle engines. The air hung thick with heat and the faint tang of gasoline, shimmering in waves as the sun burned down from above. Dust danced lazily in the light breeze, and not a soul was in sight, at least, no one who could help. Then there was the sound of laughter. Sharp. Mocking. Loud enough to fill the empty space. The bikers had arrived. They were the kind of men who moved in packs, half wolves, half vultures, always circling, always looking for someone to prey on. Their custom choppers were parked haphazardly across the lot, engines still idling, spitting bursts of smoke into the air. The bikes were as flashy as the men who rode them, chrome gleaming in the sun, leather saddlebags hanging heavy like trophies. Each bike seemed louder than the last, each engine roaring as if to remind the world of who owned this place. And there they stood, 6 of them, shoulder to shoulder like a wall of leather and denim. Jackets emblazoned with a grinning skull. Boots that left heavy marks in the dust. Faces full of sneers and smirks. They belonged here, no one else did. Alex Carter knew the type. He'd seen it before, men who mistook cruelty for strength, who got louder when others stayed quiet. Trouble, wrapped up in black leather and bad attitudes. He wasn't surprised to see them here, nor was he scared. He felt nothing at all. Alex kept his head down as he placed the pizzas into the back of his van. 1, 2, 3 boxes stacked carefully, the grease-stained cardboard warm in his hands. Just another delivery. Just another day. But quiet men in the wrong places tend to stand out. "Hey," a voice called out suddenly, sharp as a whip crack. Alex paused but didn't look up. He knew better than to take the bait. "Hey. I'm talking to you, pizza boy." The voice was gravelly and mean, edged with something more dangerous than anger, amusement. Alex turned his head just enough to glance over his shoulder. The leader of the group stood at the front of the pack, a man in his mid-40s with a skull tattoo inked across the side of his neck. The lines of the tattoo were sharp, running right up to his jaw like it might bite him. His hair was buzzed short, face roughened by years of trouble. A man who enjoyed being feared. Skullneck. Alex didn't know his real name, and he didn't care to. Men like him always had nicknames, bad ones they wore like medals. "You think you can just park here?" Skullneck demanded, spreading his arms wide like the parking lot belonged to him. His voice carried over the low hum of motorcycle engines. Alex kept his expression neutral. He'd learned long ago that silence was a shield, one that frustrated men like this to no end. The other bikers stirred at Skullneck's words, shifting eagerly, their eyes locked on Alex like he was something small and helpless they could toy with. One of them, short and wiry with a long red beard, grinned. Another, a heavy-set man with tattoos down both arms, snorted like he was waiting for a show. Alex turned back to the van without answering, his fingers moving to close the back doors carefully, as if the entire lot wasn't brimming with tension. "What, you deaf, pizza boy?" Skullneck growled, stepping closer. "You gonna ignore me? Maybe you didn't hear me the first time. You don't park here." The words echoed, bouncing off the silence that followed. Alex let the back doors of the van click shut, locking the pizza safely inside. He didn't move quickly or nervously. He simply turned around to face Skullneck and the others. Their laughter stopped as they watched him. Alex stood calm and still, his shoulders relaxed, his face unreadable. The sun cast long shadows on the pavement, stretching out between them like an invisible line. His eyes, steady, unwavering, met Skullneck's. "I'm not looking for trouble," Alex said finally. His voice was quiet, even. For a moment, Skullneck blinked, surprised by the calm tone. But then he sneered again, his bravado returning in full force. "Trouble?" Skullneck mocked. "You think I'm trouble? Nah. I'm just trying to teach you some manners. People don't park in my lot without asking permission." One of the bikers behind him laughed a short, barking sound. "Yeah, respect the rules, pizza boy." Skullneck grinned, encouraged by his pack. "Maybe we need to teach you what happens when people don't show us respect." Alex didn't move. His hands rested at his sides, relaxed but ready. "Leave it alone," he said quietly. Skullneck's grin faltered just slightly. Something about Alex's tone, it wasn't pleading, and it wasn't scared. It was just, flat. Like a warning. But Skullneck brushed it off. Men like him didn't know how to listen. "Or what?" Skullneck asked, stepping closer, his boots scraping against the pavement. He was only a few feet away now, close enough that Alex could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the way his fists curled at his sides. Alex didn't answer. He didn't need to. Behind Skullneck, Redbeard took the opportunity to stir things up. With a sharp laugh, he walked up to Alex's van and kicked the rear bumper with a loud clang. The sound cut through the air like a gunshot. Alex's jaw tightened ever so slightly, his eyes flicking toward the van. But he said nothing. "Careful with that," he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying enough weight to make Redbeard pause for half a second. Redbeard scoffed. "What are you gonna do about it?" Before Alex could respond, another biker, a wiry man with a dirty bandana tied around his head, grabbed one of the pizza boxes Alex had placed in the van and yanked it free. The box tumbled to the ground, landing face down with a smack. The smell of pepperoni and melted cheese filled the air. The bikers erupted in laughter, the sound filling the empty lot like a pack of hyenas. "Oops," Bandana said, grinning like a child who'd smashed his toy on purpose. "Guess you're not getting paid for that one, huh?" Skullneck joined in the laughter, his shoulders shaking as he wiped at his mouth with the back of his hand. "You're gonna have to do better than that, pizza boy," he said. "Maybe next time you'll learn to be polite." Alex stayed perfectly still, his body almost too still, like a stone statue standing in the heat. He didn't look at the box on the ground. He didn't look at Redbeard or Bandana. Instead, his gaze settled back on Skullneck, his expression calm and cold all at once. And for a split second, so brief that no one else noticed, his hand hovered near his pocket. The old dog tag was still there, its worn edges digging into his palm. He could feel the weight of it, the memories it carried. Alex closed his hand into a fist, letting the moment pass. Not yet. Skullneck tilted his head, frowning. Something about the way Alex looked at him made him uneasy. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was nothing. Pure, quiet nothing. You don't talk much, do you? Skullneck said, trying to sound amused, but his voice wavered ever so slightly. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue. Redbeard and Bandana laughed again, but this time it was softer, nervous, like they could feel something in the air shifting. Alex stayed quiet. He didn't blink. And Skullneck, for the first time, felt something cold creep up his spine. You shouldn't have done that, Alex said softly, finally breaking the silence. The words weren't a threat. They were a fact. The bikers stopped laughing. Skullneck stared at Alex, confusion flickering in his eyes. What did you say? Alex didn't answer. Instead, he just looked at them. And for the first time, the bikers saw it, the calm intensity in his eyes. The kind of look that belonged to a man who'd seen things they couldn't imagine. A man who didn't need to prove himself because he'd already done it 1,000 times before. A man they shouldn't have messed with. But they didn't know that yet. Not yet. Script continuation, setting the conflict and tension. The laughter had died down, but the tension hung heavy now, like a storm cloud waiting to break. Skullneck narrowed his eyes at Alex, tilting his head like he was trying to figure something out. That unnerving calm on Alex's face, he didn't look afraid. Not angry. Just steady. Like a man waiting for the right moment. It didn't sit right. You got something to say, pizza boy? Skullneck asked again, his voice lower now, the playfulness gone. Speak up. Alex didn't. He didn't need to. Silence had a power of its own, and it made the bikers uneasy. Men like Skullneck, Redbeard, and Bandana, they were used to loud fights, shouting matches, chaos. Silence was different. Silence was dangerous. But Skullneck, like most men who talked too much, didn't know how to leave well enough alone. Grab his keys, he barked suddenly, jerking his chin toward Alex's van. Bandana's grin widened, showing crooked yellow teeth. Oh, this'll be fun. He moved forward, confident, cocky. Alex stayed still as the biker approached. Let's see if this delivery boy can walk home today, Bandana sneered, reaching out to snatch the keys dangling from Alex's belt loop. Alex's hand moved. It was so fast that Bandana didn't even see it happen. One moment his fingers were reaching for the keys, the next, Alex's hand gripped his wrist like a steel vice. Hey, what the? Bandana stammered, jerking back instinctively. But he couldn't move. Alex didn't squeeze hard, just enough to stop him. His grip was firm, unshakable. For a split second, his calm eyes flicked up to meet Bandana's panicked gaze. You don't want to do that, Alex said quietly. The words were simple, almost polite, but they landed like a hammer. Bandana froze, his confidence crumbling under the weight of Alex's tone. Skullneck noticed the hesitation. What are you waiting for? He barked. Get the keys. Bandana swallowed hard, trying to save face. Let go of me, man, he snapped, yanking at his arm. Alex released him. Just like that. The sudden freedom sent Bandana stumbling backward. He nearly fell but caught himself at the last second, glaring at Alex like he'd been burned. What the hell is wrong with you? He muttered, shaking out his wrist. Alex didn't answer. He just stood there, watching them. Skullneck's face darkened. He could feel control slipping, and men like him didn't handle that well. He pointed a finger at Alex, his tattooed neck tensing. You think you're better than us, huh? Too good to answer when someone talks to you. Alex turned his head slightly, his expression calm. I told you. I'm not looking for trouble. Well, you found it, Skullneck spat. He gestured to Redbeard and another biker, a tall man with a scar running from his temple to his chin. Teach him a lesson. Redbeard grinned, cracking his knuckles as he stepped forward. Scarman followed, his eyes narrowed and cruel. But Alex didn't move. You sure about this? He asked, his voice soft and even. The bikers hesitated just slightly. Something about the way he said it, like he already knew how this would end, made them pause. But Skullneck was watching, and hesitation would look weak. Redbeard sneered. You're outnumbered, pizza boy. He lunged. Alex sidestepped. It happened in the blink of an eye. Redbeard swung a fist, expecting Alex to flinch or stumble. But Alex didn't. He simply stepped to the side, calm as water, and Redbeard's fist met empty air. What? Redbeard staggered, confused, spinning to face Alex again. Scarman followed, more cautious this time, moving in with fists raised. Alex's movements were smooth, almost effortless. As Scarman threw a punch, Alex leaned back just enough to let it graze the air in front of his face. He caught the biker's wrist mid-swing, twisting it sharply, not enough to break it, but enough to drop Scarman to his knees with a pained grunt. Redbeard watched, his eyes wide. What the? Scarman cradled his wrist, groaning. Alex let go of him without another word, stepping back to his original spot. The silence that followed was deafening. Skullneck's face turned red. What are you two idiots doing? He's one guy. Scarman shot Skullneck a furious glare as he got to his feet, still holding his wrist. You try it, then, he muttered under his breath. Redbeard wasn't smiling anymore. He looked at Alex differently now, like he wasn't sure what kind of man stood in front of him. Alex remained perfectly calm. His hands were loose at his sides, his posture relaxed. But there was something in the way he stood, a quiet confidence, the kind that came from experience. Walk away, Alex said softly, looking directly at Skullneck. Now. Skullneck laughed a short, ugly sound. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you don't get to tell me what to do. He reached behind his jacket, and for the first time, Alex's expression hardened. Skullneck's hand reappeared, holding a long metal chain. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't clever. It was the weapon of someone who didn't know how to fight clean. The links rattled as he wrapped it around his fist, grinning like he'd already won. This'll shut you up, Skullneck growled. The other bikers murmured, stepping back a little as the chain swung loose, glinting in the sunlight. Redbeard and Bandana exchanged uneasy looks. Skullneck didn't notice. His focus was entirely on Alex. Alex exhaled slowly through his nose, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. For the first time, he looked like he was done holding back. Skullneck lunged forward, swinging the chain. Alex moved. He stepped inside the swing, faster than anyone expected, his body close to Skullneck's before the chain could land. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Skullneck's wrist, twisting it sharply. The chain slipped from Skullneck's grip with a clatter, falling to the ground like a dead snake. Skullneck let out a strangled yell, his knees buckling under the pressure. Alex didn't stop there. He shifted, pulling Skullneck's arm into a lock, holding him in place like it was nothing. His face was calm, expressionless. Enough, Alex said quietly, his voice cutting through the biker's pained grunts. For the first time, Skullneck looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw something in Alex's eyes he hadn't seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was control. Who the hell are you? Skullneck croaked, his voice shaking. Alex let him go. Skullneck fell back, stumbling as he clutched his arm, staring at Alex like he'd seen a ghost. Alex looked at the group of bikers, his gaze sweeping across them one by one. Redbeard, Bandana, Scarman. They all looked back at him, their bravado gone, replaced by something else. Fear. I told you, Alex said, his voice steady. I'm not looking for trouble. The parking lot fell silent again. The bikers stood frozen, unsure what to do, their leader crumpled on the ground. Alex turned back to his van, reaching into his pocket to pull out his keys. He opened the driver's door, pausing just long enough to glance over his shoulder. Walk away, he said again, his tone calm but final. This time, they listened. The harassment didn't stop there. Skullneck and his crew were like shadows in Alex's rearview mirror, relentless and mocking. Their engines roared like thunder as they followed him from one street to another, drowning out the quiet hum of his van. It started subtly. At first, they just trailed him close enough for him to notice but far enough to pretend it wasn't deliberate. Then, they grew bolder. At an intersection, two bikers pulled ahead of Alex, revving their engines as their tires screeched against the asphalt. Redbeard, his long beard whipping in the wind, pointed a finger at Alex and laughed, as though he'd already won some unspoken game. In his rearview mirror, Alex caught sight of Skullneck and Bandana pulling up behind him, blocking him in. They were cornering him on a quiet afternoon, in broad daylight. Alex's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips, steady and deliberate. His eyes flicked to the side mirror, where Scarman rode close, his cracked sunglasses reflecting Alex's face like a distorted funhouse mirror. What's the matter? Scarman shouted, his voice cutting through the engine noise. Afraid to fight back, pizza boy. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Alex didn't answer. He kept his eyes forward, fixed on the traffic light that hovered 100 feet ahead, glowing yellow. Just a little farther. Scarman pulled up closer, his knee practically brushing the side of Alex's van. You hear me, he barked. I asked you a question. Alex said nothing. Silence was his weapon, and it worked better than any insult. The light turned red. Alex rolled to a stop, exhaling slowly through his nose. The bikers circled him like predators, Scarman on his right, Redbeard and Bandana on the left, and Skullneck holding position in the rear. It was a blockade, plain and simple. For a moment, it was quiet. Then, Scarman leaned close to Alex's window, his cracked sunglasses almost touching the glass. You gonna sit there all day, or you gonna man up? Scarman sneered. His breath fogged up the window, and Alex could see the faint scars beneath the man's stubble. You're just another nobody, aren't you? Alex's jaw tightened. Another nobody. The words pulled at a thread deep in his mind, unraveling memories he'd buried long ago. The desert sun was merciless, beating down on sand dunes that stretched endlessly in every direction. Alex lay perfectly still, his body half buried in the sand, blending into the landscape. His spotter's voice was low and calm through the earpiece. Wind, 2 clicks east. Adjust. Alex exhaled, his hand steady on the rifle. The scope framed the target perfectly, a shadow in the distance, unaware of what was coming. Target acquired, his spotter whispered. Alex's finger rested lightly on the trigger, his breathing synced with the movement of the wind. He fired. Alex blinked, and the vision was gone. The light turned green. The bikers didn't move. Alex's fingers tapped against the steering wheel, his gaze steady. For a brief second, his hand hovered over the glove compartment. Then he stopped himself. Let it go, he murmured under his breath. Let it go. With slow, deliberate movements, Alex shifted the van into gear. The engine rumbled softly, a stark contrast to the bikers' roaring choppers. He pulled forward carefully, maneuvering his van through the gaps they left open just enough for him to pass. Scarman slapped his palm against the van's side panel, laughing like it was all some big joke. Where you running to, huh? The bikers regrouped almost immediately, falling in behind Alex again. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The harassment escalated over the next hour. They followed him across town through neighborhoods, down winding streets, and past strip malls where families bustled about their weekend routines, oblivious to the quiet chaos on the road. At every stop sign, Skullneck's crew made themselves known. One time, Bandana pulled up alongside Alex's van and lobbed an empty beer bottle at the driver's side door. It hit with a loud thunk, the glass shattering on the pavement below. Bandana cackled as he sped off, circling back to join the pack. Another time, Redbeard cut in front of Alex just as he tried to make a turn, forcing him to slam on the brakes. The pizzas in the back shifted and tumbled, but Alex didn't flinch. Not once. Inside the van, Alex was a statue, his expression calm, his focus unshakable. But inside his mind, something was stirring. At one point, they pushed him out of town. The buildings grew farther apart, replaced by empty fields and stretches of cracked highway. The hum of city life faded into the background, leaving only the growl of motorcycle engines and the steady drone of Alex's van. They were hurting him. Alex knew it. He felt it. And yet, he drove on. The road stretched endlessly ahead, surrounded by nothing but dry grass and telephone poles that stood like silent sentinels. The bikers flanked him on all sides, now Skullneck at the rear, Redbeard to the left, Bandana to the right, and Scarman just ahead, leading the way. It wasn't random anymore. This was deliberate. They wanted him out here, alone, where no one could see. The van jolted suddenly as Bandana swerved too close, bumping the back corner. Alex corrected quickly, his grip firm on the wheel. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Skullneck's grin stretched wide as he revved his engine. Alex exhaled sharply. "All right," he muttered to himself. "That's enough." His voice was soft, but it carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Up ahead, Scarman slowed his bike, forcing Alex to decelerate. Behind him, Skullneck closed the gap, boxing him in completely. The van rolled to a stop on the side of the road, its engine idling softly. The bikers surrounded it like a pack of wolves, their silhouettes dark against the setting sun. The sky had turned a deep orange, shadows stretching long across the empty road. Alex sat quietly, both hands resting on the wheel. For a long moment, he didn't move. Outside, Skullneck dismounted his bike, the gravel crunching beneath his boots as he approached the driver's side. "Game over, pizza boy," Skullneck said, his voice low and menacing. He tapped the window with his knuckle, grinning like he'd already won. "You thought you could ignore us?" Alex didn't look at him. His eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. Scarman stepped forward, his scarred face twisted into a sneer. "Get out of the van." Bandana laughed from somewhere behind. "Yeah, let's see if Pizza Boy's got any fight in him." Alex's fingers drummed lightly against the wheel, as though he were keeping time with a song only he could hear. For the first time, his calm mask began to crack, not with fear, but with something else. Something harder. Slowly, Alex reached into his pocket. The bikers tensed, watching him closely. But all he pulled out was a small, worn dog tag. He held it between his fingers, staring at the etched letters as the light caught its dull metal surface. The weight of old memories settled on his shoulders, but he let the moment pass. Carefully, Alex tucked the dog tag back into his pocket. Then he opened the door. The door creaked open slowly. The sound sliced through the air like a knife, silencing the bikers' laughter. Alex stepped out, calm and deliberate, as though he had all the time in the world. He wasn't tall, wasn't bulky like the bikers. There was nothing about him that screamed danger. To anyone watching, he was just a regular delivery guy, worn sneakers scuffing against the gravel, his faded uniform rumpled from a long day. But there was something in his movements, something unspoken. The way he stood. The way his eyes scanned them one by one, cool and unreadable. It was the kind of stillness that came from years of practice, from discipline drilled into someone who'd lived through things most people couldn't imagine. The bikers didn't see it. Or maybe they did and ignored it. Look at him, Bandana sneered, elbowing Redbeard. This guy's shaking in his boots. Alex wasn't shaking. Not even close. He slowly shut the van door and leaned against it, crossing his arms over his chest. His face remained neutral, almost bored. Skull Neck stepped closer, the veins in his thick neck pulsing as he grinned down at Alex. The tattoo, a dark skull inked with precision, seemed to stretch and warp as his grin widened. "You got a problem with us, Pizza Boy?" Skull Neck asked, his tone mocking. "No," Alex said quietly. "One word. Calm. Steady." The simplicity of his answer seemed to irritate Skull Neck even more. He wanted a reaction, and Alex wasn't giving him one. Scarman stepped forward now, pushing up his cracked sunglasses to reveal a pair of cold, dark eyes. "You think you're better than us?" "No." Another simple, quiet answer. Skull Neck scoffed and turned to the others, waving a dismissive hand. "Listen to this guy. Thinks he's tough 'cause he's not crying for his mama." Bandana and Redbeard laughed on cue, their voices echoing into the empty fields. Scarman wasn't laughing. He stared at Alex, his head tilted slightly, as if trying to figure something out. "Why so quiet, huh?" he asked, stepping closer. "You scared?" Alex looked at him, finally meeting his gaze. "I'm not scared." The honesty in his voice made Scarman pause for just a second, as if he wasn't sure how to respond. But Skull Neck was already losing patience. "You know what?" Skull Neck growled, cracking his knuckles. "You need a lesson. Nobody disrespects us, not some nobody delivery boy." He grabbed Alex by the collar and shoved him backward. Alex staggered slightly but didn't fight back. "Not yet." Redbeard whooped in excitement. "Yeah, teach him." Skull Neck shoved Alex again, harder this time. Alex stumbled but caught himself, his feet planting firmly on the gravel. "Hey," Skull Neck barked. "Where's all that quiet attitude now?" The bikers jeered, closing in tighter. But Alex stayed calm. He stood straight, brushing dust from his uniform. And then, for the first time, he spoke with a quiet authority that made the air feel heavier. "You've had your fun." The bikers fell silent for half a second. The change in tone, subtle but undeniable, caught them off guard. Then Bandana snorted. "What'd you say, Pizza Boy?" "You've had your fun," Alex repeated, softer this time. He looked at each of them, one by one, as if memorizing their faces. His gaze lingered on Skull Neck. "Walk away." Scarman raised an eyebrow. "Or what?" Alex didn't answer. Instead, he turned slightly, eyes drifting to the horizon where the last sliver of sun was sinking beneath the trees. The light bathed the fields in hues of red and gold. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The bikers looked at each other, uncertainty flickering in their expressions. Then Skull Neck broke the silence with a sharp laugh. "You hear that, boys? He thinks he's giving us a warning." He stepped toward Alex again, close enough that their noses almost touched. "Let me explain something to you, Pizza Boy," Skull Neck growled. "Out here, we make the rules. You got no backup, no friends, no help. It's just you and us. And I promise you don't want us as enemies." Alex didn't flinch. His expression didn't change. "Are you done?" he asked quietly. The question landed like a slap. Skull Neck's grin faltered, just for a moment. "Hold on," Scarman said suddenly, narrowing his eyes. He stepped closer, peering at Alex's face like he was trying to recognize him. "You look familiar." The other bikers paused, turning towards Scarman. Skullneck scoffed. What are you talking about? He's a nobody. No, Scarman muttered, his scarred brow furrowed. I've seen you before. Somewhere. Alex's jaw tightened slightly. It was the only tell. Where? Redbeard asked, his grin slipping. Who is he? Scarman stared hard at Alex, piecing something together in his mind. Then his face paled slightly. He looked at Skullneck. We might wanna back off. Skullneck spun on him, furious. Back off? Are you kidding me? I'm serious, Scarman insisted, his voice lower now. There's something off about him. I don't like it. The other bikers exchanged glances. Redbeard's smile wavered, and Bandana stopped laughing entirely. Skullneck turned back to Alex, his face twisted with anger. You trying to scare us, huh? You get one of us to chicken out, and suddenly you think you're in charge. He stepped forward again, this time shoving Alex harder than before. Alex stumbled back, his sneakers skidding against the gravel. For a moment, it looked like he might fall. But then he caught himself, straightening slowly. And something changed. His posture shifted subtly, but noticeably. Before, he'd been small, unassuming, passive. Now, he stood tall, his shoulders squared, his gaze sharper than before. His presence seemed to expand, like he'd taken up space he'd been holding back until now. The bikers felt it too. What's with this guy? Bandana whispered nervously. Alex didn't say a word. He looked at Skullneck, his expression unreadable. And then, without warning, he moved. It wasn't much, just a step forward. But it was enough. Skullneck flinched, stepping back instinctively. The others froze, their eyes darting between Alex and Skullneck. What are you doing? Skullneck snapped at his crew, his voice louder now, almost desperate. He's just one guy. Don't let him mess with you. Alex tilted his head slightly, his gaze locking onto Skullneck's eyes. You should have walked away, he said quietly. For the first time, Skullneck looked unsure. The lot was silent, except for the low growl of motorcycle engines and the crunch of boots against gravel. The sun was gone now, and the sky had turned a deep, bruised purple. Long shadows stretched across the empty space, making the bikers look even larger, more menacing. Alex stood with his back to the van, his calm, quiet presence at odds with the storm of chaos brewing around him. The bikers fanned out, a half circle of leather jackets and bad intentions. Their grins stretched wide, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. This was their moment. Or so they thought. Skullneck stepped forward, the leader of the pack, his boots thudding against the ground like drum beats. His tattooed neck rippled as he laughed, the sound harsh and ugly in the stillness. End of the line, pizza boy, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. He spread his arms wide as if to show off the trap they'd laid. No more running. No more hiding. You ready to beg yet? Alex didn't answer. Skullneck leaned in closer, a sneer twisting his face. You hear me? You done, boy? The other bikers joined in, their laughter ringing out, bouncing off the cracked walls of the abandoned lot. Alex didn't flinch. He didn't yell or curse. He simply opened the van door and stepped out, his movements deliberate and smooth, like someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. For a split second, the bikers paused. They'd been expecting fear, panic, maybe even tears. But the man who stood before them was calm. Too calm. What's he doing? Bandana whispered to Redbeard, his voice low. Who cares? Redbeard barked back. He's outnumbered. Let's show him what happens when you mess with us. Skullneck grinned, baring his teeth. Last chance, pizza boy. Get on your knees, apologize, and maybe we won't rough you up too bad. Alex looked up at Skull Neck, his expression unreadable. You boys really don't know how to pick your battles, do you? The quiet confidence in his voice sent a ripple through the group. It was a simple sentence, but the way he said it, calm, certain, and cold, made the bikers hesitate. What'd you say? Skull Neck snarled, his face darkening. Alex didn't answer. Instead, he reached back into the van, moving slowly, deliberately. His hand disappeared inside, and the bikers tensed, expecting him to grab a tire iron or maybe a wrench. What's he got in there? Redbeard muttered, his voice tinged with unease. The answer came when Alex turned back around, holding a small, black case. It looked harmless, just a simple, weathered case, the kind you'd overlook at a garage sale. But something about the way Alex carried it, the way his fingers gripped the handle with practiced ease, made the bikers shift uneasily. What's that supposed to be? Bandana sneered, trying to sound tough. Alex didn't say a word. He crouched down, setting the case on the ground. The lid snapped open with a sharp click. And that's when everything changed. The laughter stopped. The smirks vanished. The bikers stared, their eyes widening as Alex pulled out the first piece of the rifle. It wasn't just any rifle. This was a precision sniper rifle, a military-grade weapon, sleek and deadly. Its matte black metal caught the faint glow of the twilight sky, gleaming like a coiled viper. The pieces were disassembled, but Alex's hands moved over them with a speed and familiarity that told the bikers everything they needed to know. This wasn't the first time he'd done this. Redbeard took a step back. What the hell is that? Is that a rifle? Bandana whispered, his voice shaky. Scarman swallowed hard, his face pale. That's not just any rifle. Skull Neck frowned, his bravado cracking slightly. What are you playing at, huh? You think you're scaring us with a toy? Alex didn't look up. His hands moved quickly, locking the pieces together with sharp, metallic snaps. Each sound echoed in the silence like a gunshot. Snap. Click. Lock. The rifle came together smoothly, piece by piece, like it was born to fit in his hands. By the time Alex stood up, the rifle was complete, cradled in his arms with an ease that made the bikers' stomachs turn. Finally, he looked up. And his eyes were different now. Gone was the quiet delivery driver, the man they'd mocked and pushed around. In his place stood someone else entirely, someone dangerous. His gaze was steady, ice cold, and sharp enough to cut glass. The bikers felt it. What is he doing? Redbeard stammered, his voice cracking. Skull Neck forced a laugh, though it sounded strained. You think that scares us? You think you're some kind of tough guy now? Alex tilted his head slightly, the faintest ghost of a smile on his lips. You've got about 5 seconds, he said quietly, his voice low and controlled. Get on your bikes and leave. Skull Neck's face turned red. Or what? Alex's gaze didn't waver. Or I start hitting targets. For a beat, no one moved. Then Skull Neck barked a laugh. You think you're some kind of sniper? You're bluffing. Alex didn't answer. Instead, he turned slightly, lifting the rifle to his shoulder. His movements were fluid, practiced, the kind that came from years of training. The bikers watched in stunned silence as he sighted down the scope. Hold on, Scarman muttered, his voice tight with panic. Guys, I think he's serious. Alex's finger rested on the trigger. He exhaled slowly. Crack. The shot rang out, sharp and deafening. Skull Neck flinched, spinning around to see what happened. Behind him, one of the motorcycles wobbled where it stood. The side mirror was gone, shattered into pieces on the ground. The bikers froze. Scarman's voice trembled. He hit that from here. Alex didn't lower the rifle. His aim shifted slightly. Crack. Another shot. This time, a biker's helmet, perched on a rusty post, flew off and landed several feet away, spinning to a stop. Holy bandana gasped, stumbling back. He's a sniper, Scarman whispered, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. He's a damn sniper. The panic spread like wildfire. The bikers who'd been so confident just moments ago were now backing away, their eyes darting between Alex and the shattered targets. Alex lowered the rifle slightly, his expression calm as ever. Next shot isn't a warning. Skullneck's face was pale now, the tattooed skull on his neck seeming to shrink. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Leave, Alex said quietly. The bikers didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled for their bikes, engines roaring to life as they kicked up gravel, speeding away as fast as they could. The lot emptied in seconds, the sound of their motorcycles fading into the night. Skullneck was the last to go. He looked back one final time, his face a mix of fear and disbelief. Alex met his gaze, rifle still in hand, steady as stone. And that was all it took. Skullneck revved his engine and tore out of the lot, disappearing into the darkness. For a long moment, the lot was silent again. Alex exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. He looked down at the ground, where the broken helmet and shattered mirror lay, a reminder to anyone who might think about testing him again. Then, without a word, he walked back to the van, opened the door, and carefully placed the rifle back in its case. He shut the door, dusted off his hands, and got in the driver's seat. To anyone watching, he would have looked like just another delivery driver heading home after a long day. But Alex Carter wasn't just anyone. And now, they knew it. The rumble of engines faded into the distance until there was nothing left but silence. A cool breeze swept across the empty lot, carrying with it the faint smell of oil, dust, and spent gunpowder. Alex sat behind the wheel of his van, his fingers tapping gently against the steering wheel as he stared into the rearview mirror. No movement. No sound. They were gone. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. But there was no relief, not really. He'd handled the problem, made his point, and yet, deep down, he felt that familiar itch, a shadow of an old life he'd sworn to leave behind. A life that felt too close now. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the worn dog tag that never left him. The metal was cool against his palm, engraved with numbers and letters that no one but him would understand. Alex closed his fingers around it, his grip tightening for just a moment before he slipped it back into his pocket. Not today, he muttered to himself. Not again. But as he looked at the shattered mirror and helmet still lying where they'd fallen, he knew this wasn't over. The sun had completely disappeared now, replaced by the glow of streetlights and headlights cutting through the darkening streets. Alex drove in silence, the hum of his van's engine the only sound keeping him company. He knew the bikers. Not by name, but by type. Guys like Skullneck didn't just take a beating and disappear. No, they were the kind to regroup, to stew in their bruised egos and anger. A shot to their pride hurt more than any physical blow ever could. They'll be back, Alex said under his breath, his voice barely audible over the drone of the engine. But he wasn't worried. Not yet. He'd been trained to anticipate threats, to calculate every variable in a situation long before it unfolded. It was instinct hardwired into him from years spent behind enemy lines, where one wrong move meant the difference between life and death. A red light stopped him at an empty intersection. The world seemed eerily still. For a moment, Alex's mind wandered back to the dry heat of the desert, the weight of his gear pressing into his shoulders, the distant voices on the radio. Wind east, 2 clicks. You see him, Carter? Yes. I see him. Take the shot. Alex blinked, forcing himself back to the present. The light turned green, and he pressed the gas pedal. Memories like that didn't just vanish. They clung to him like shadows, waiting for the quiet moments to creep back in. And every time, Alex had to push them away, reminding himself that he wasn't that man anymore. At least, he didn't want to be. Alex pulled into the driveway of his small apartment complex, parking the van in his usual spot beneath a flickering street lamp. He grabbed the black case from the passenger seat and headed inside, taking the stairs two at a time. His apartment was simple. Clean. Almost too clean, like no one really lived there. A worn couch sat against one wall, a modest kitchen in the corner, and a table where two empty pizza boxes served as his most recent decor. No family photos. No decorations. Nothing to tell you who he was. Alex set the case down gently on the table, running his hand over the metal latch before locking it tight. As he moved to the sink, splashing cold water on his face, he caught his reflection in the small bathroom mirror. His face had lines now, marks left by years of stress and countless sleepless nights. The stubble on his jaw had gone slightly gray, and his eyes still held the weight of everything he'd seen. "Delivery driver," he said quietly to his reflection, forcing a half smile. Nothing more. But he didn't believe it, not really. And now, neither would those bikers. While Alex sat in his quiet apartment, Skull Neck and his crew had regrouped at a biker bar on the edge of town. The place was a dive, flickering neon lights, a jukebox playing rock songs from the 80s, and the strong smell of beer mixed with grease. Skull Neck paced back and forth, his boots scuffing against the wooden floor. His face was red, his fists clenched. "He's just one guy," Skull Neck roared, slamming his hand onto the bar. "One guy? And you all ran like cowards." Redbeard took a cautious sip of his beer, his eyes darting around the room. "That wasn't just one guy, Skull. You saw him. He's a sniper, man. He hit a helmet from what, 50 yards? In the dark." Scarman nodded slowly. He knew what he was doing. "That ain't something you pick up at a shooting range." Skull Neck's face darkened. "I don't care what he is. Nobody makes me look like a fool. Nobody." He turned to the others, his gaze sharp and mean. "We're not letting him walk away from this. Tomorrow, we go back. We find him. And we finish this." Bandana frowned. "You sure that's smart, Skull? What if he what?" Skull Neck snapped, stepping close. "You scared of some pizza boy with a toy gun?" Bandana didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The look in his eyes said it all. He'd seen Alex in action. That calm, quiet confidence wasn't the kind of thing you could fake. But Skull Neck wasn't listening. His pride was too bruised, his rage too strong. "We'll remind him who runs this town," Skull Neck growled, his voice low. "Sniper or not, he's just one man." Alex knew they'd come back. He didn't need anyone to tell him that. Men like Skull Neck always did. He sat at the small table in his apartment, a mug of coffee cooling in front of him, staring at the black case that sat in the center of the table. It felt heavier now, like it carried more than just metal and gunpowder. It carried decisions. Ones he didn't want to make. Alex rubbed his temples, leaning back in the chair. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered to himself. And he hadn't. He'd left that life behind for a reason. He'd promised himself no more violence, no more battles. Just peace and simple living. But trouble, it seemed, always found him no matter where he went. His phone buzzed on the counter. Alex glanced over. The message was from the pizza shop. "Need you on early tomorrow. Big delivery day. You in?" Alex stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back a single word, "Yeah." Outside, the city was quiet, but in Alex's apartment, the silence felt heavy. He unlatched the black case and opened it once more, the rifle resting inside like an old friend. He ran his hand along the barrel, his thoughts drifting back to the past. The dog tag dangled from his hand as he whispered softly, "One shot, one kill." He looked out the window into the dark streets, the quiet ticking of the clock behind him. Tomorrow, the bikers would come. And Alex would be ready. The sound of engines faded into the distance, leaving only the stillness of the empty lot. The heavy hum of adrenaline in the air began to dissipate as Alex stood motionless, the rifle now safely stowed in its case. Skullneck and his crew had scattered just like that. The roar of their bikes, once so threatening, was now reduced to nothing more than a fading memory. Alex didn't smile. He didn't feel the rush of victory. There was no satisfaction in sending them running. Not really. For him, it was just another day. Another moment when he had to prove that the past had never truly left him, no matter how hard he tried to bury it. His grip on the rifle relaxed, but his mind remained sharp. He needed to move quickly. The job wasn't done yet. From the corner of his eye, he spotted the flicker of lights, police cruisers pulling into the lot. The blue and red flash of their sirens cut through the darkness, creating strange, shifting shadows across the asphalt. Two officers stepped out, their boots scraping against the ground as they approached. One was tall, with a gruff demeanor and an unspoken sense of authority. The other was younger, less sure, scanning the area as they walked toward Alex. "We got a call about some bikers harassing someone here," the taller officer said, his tone professional but with a hint of curiosity. His eyes quickly flicked from Alex to the van, then to the wreckage of the broken mirror on the ground. Alex met his gaze calmly, his expression as neutral as ever. "They're gone. Won't be coming back." The officer paused, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. He glanced at the shattered mirror, then back to Alex, trying to read the man standing in front of him. "You handle this yourself?" the officer asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. There was no judgment in his words, just an odd sort of question, as if he had an inkling of the truth but was waiting for confirmation. Alex didn't flinch. "Just a delivery driver, officer." A slight smirk tugged at the officer's lips. It wasn't one of mockery. No, this was something else, something Alex knew all too well. It was the kind of smile that came from someone who had seen enough to know when there was more to the story than met the eye. The officer glanced down again at the wreckage, then back up at Alex, his eyes briefly flicking to the old black case beside him. "Right. Just a delivery driver," the officer said, his voice dry but laced with unspoken understanding. The younger officer stayed quiet, still looking over the scene with a mix of confusion and uncertainty. But his partner gave him a short nod, and together, they walked back to their cruisers, the older one exchanging a few more words with the younger officer as they climbed into the vehicles and pulled away. Alex didn't watch them leave. His eyes remained on the horizon, where the bikers had disappeared, leaving only the smell of burnt rubber and the faint echo of their engines in the night air. For a moment, the world felt as if it had returned to normal. The quiet, the peace he had fought so hard to hold onto. It felt temporary. Fleeting. But it was enough. He walked back to the van, opened the door, and slid into the driver's seat. His phone buzzed with a new pizza order. A job was a job, after all. He glanced at the blinking notification, his thumb tapping the screen to accept it. As he settled into his seat and started the engine, his eyes flickered to the rearview mirror. The dog tag that hung from the mirror swung gently with the movement of the van. It glinted in the dim light, a reminder of who he was. Who he had been. Alex reached up and lightly touched the dog tag, running his fingers over the worn metal. He let out a breath, a quiet exhale that seemed to carry the weight of everything he had left behind. But it wasn't gone. It would never be gone. "Some things never change," he muttered to himself, the words soft but sharp. The smile on his lips was barely there, but it was enough to show that he wasn't completely at peace with what had just happened. He didn't want to be the man who carried a rifle, the man who forced others to fear him. But in moments like this, it seemed there was no other choice. As the van rolled down the empty streets, Alex couldn't help but feel a little lighter. There was a sense of closure in the night air, a sense of power that had been quietly reclaimed. He knew that, tomorrow, the city would move on. The bikers would lick their wounds and retreat into the shadows, leaving the lot behind them as if nothing had ever happened. But in the back of their minds, they'd remember. They'd remember the quiet delivery driver who, with one shot, had put them in their place. And they'd think twice before ever messing with someone who appeared so ordinary again. The road stretched out before him, long and empty, the future uncertain. But for now, Alex was at peace with the man he had become. Or at least, the man he had to be. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room held the most power. And those who underestimated him, well, they never saw it coming. The engine hummed steadily beneath him, the world moving along as it always did. And Alex Carter? He just kept driving. The night air felt colder as Alex cruised down the empty road. The familiar hum of the van's engine was the only sound in the world. He glanced at the rearview mirror again, the dog tag swaying gently with each bump in the road. His fingers tightened briefly around the wheel. For a split second, his eyes clouded with something deeper, something buried. But just as quickly, it was gone, swallowed up by the steady rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. He had made it through another night. Another test. Another reminder that some battles didn't require shouting, threats, or even a single word. Some battles were won in silence. As Alex turned the corner, his mind briefly drifted back to the moment when the bikers had been staring at him in disbelief, their cocky grins faltering as they realized their mistake. Their wrong judgment. They had underestimated him. They had thought they knew what kind of man he was. But they were wrong. He wasn't the quiet pizza boy they had believed him to be. He wasn't the easy target they had assumed. No, Alex Carter had learned long ago that strength wasn't always obvious. It didn't always come in the form of a loud voice or a powerful build. It wasn't about showing off or intimidating others. It was the quiet strength, the kind that waited. The kind that bided its time, knowing that one day, the moment would come when it needed to be unleashed. And that moment had come for Alex. He had never been one for confrontation. He never wanted to be noticed. But life, for reasons beyond his control, had pushed him to a place where there was no other option but to act. To stand tall. To remind those who thought they could bully others that not everyone was as helpless as they seemed. Sometimes, the most dangerous people weren't the ones who walked around with a chip on their shoulder, flexing their muscles and boasting about their power. No. Sometimes, the most dangerous people were the ones who stayed quiet. The ones who didn't announce their capabilities to the world. They were the ones who lived in the background, going unnoticed, until the time came when they had no choice but to rise up. And when they did, it was never the way anyone expected. Alex wasn't a giant, towering over others. He wasn't a loud, brash character demanding attention. He wasn't even a man who wore his strength on his sleeve. But when it mattered, when the situation called for it, he showed them that power wasn't about appearances. It wasn't about how you looked, or what you wore, or how much noise you made. It was about knowing your worth. It was about understanding that, no matter how many times you were knocked down, you could always rise again. Sometimes, the people who were overlooked, the quiet ones, the ones who didn't make a scene, were the ones who had the most strength hidden within them. They didn't boast. They didn't brag. They didn't make threats. But when pushed too far, when the line was crossed and there was no turning back, they reminded the world that strength doesn't always look the way you expect it to. That quiet man standing in the corner? He might be the one who can take down an entire room without even raising his voice. Alex's thoughts returned to the bikers again. They had learned that lesson the hard way. They had thought they knew him. They had thought he was just some delivery driver, someone they could make fun of, someone they could bully into submission. They had assumed that his appearance, his calm demeanor, meant weakness. They hadn't known the truth. Alex had been through more than they could ever imagine. He had been to the places they would never go. He had seen things they would never understand. And though he had buried that part of himself long ago, it was still there, ready to emerge when necessary. That night, it had emerged. And in the end, those bikers had learned a powerful lesson: never judge a book by its cover. Never underestimate someone based on what they appeared to be. You never knew who might be hiding a storm inside. Alex wasn't about to parade around in his past. He wasn't about to brag about the things he had done, the things he was capable of. That wasn't who he was. But sometimes, life had a way of forcing people to show what they were made of. As Alex drove farther from the lot, the roads opening up in front of him, he thought about the bikers once more. He thought about their fear when they realized they had misjudged him. He thought about their faces when they saw the rifle, when they realized the kind of man they had been messing with. And in that moment, he realized something important. They weren't the only ones who learned that night. Alex had learned, too. He had learned that it wasn't about the past. It wasn't about the things he had done or the life he had left behind. It was about who he was now. About the man he had chosen to be. And who he was someone who would stand up for himself when the time came. Someone who would remind others, when necessary, that he wasn't the weak one. He wasn't the one to mess with. But he didn't need to announce that to the world. He didn't need to go around with a chip on his shoulder, demanding respect. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. And if there was one thing those bikers learned that day, one thing they would never forget, it was this. You never judge a man by his uniform. You never judge a person by how they look or what they wear. Strength doesn't come in a package that fits neatly into a stereotype. Sometimes, the strongest people in the room are the ones who stay silent. The ones who are overlooked. The ones who never draw attention to themselves. But when the time comes, they rise. And they rise with a power that no one can ignore. So, the next time you see someone who seems small, who seems quiet, who seems unremarkable, don't make the mistake of underestimating them. Don't assume that their silence means weakness. Because in the end, you might find that the last person you should have messed with was the one who seemed the least likely to fight back. And Alex Carter? He was proof of that.